Welcome. I'm Bill Jesse, and I'm privileged and honored to join you today in a little celebration of my best friend, Art's life. Art is my best friend, and I mean is, not was. He is my best friend because he will always, forever be with me. When I saw Art last November, we had a wonderful conversation that many of you know Art is fully capable of. But the last thing he said to me is, Bill, don't let this expletive-deleted event turn into some sad, mopey, terrible story. He said, make sure people have fun. And I said, thanks, Art, that's your history of giving me modest assignments. So I think one of the best ways to celebrate Art's life is by making sure that we follow kind of that last wishes. So I'm going to ask each of you to take a few minutes and get us into the right mood. So step number one, put your fingers on your forehead, peel off the somber face. Step number two, put your sad voice away, and let's take your happy outside voice. There we go. Good start. And let's join in celebrating this remarkable man. Now, to finally get into the perfect mood for this, what I'd like each of you to do is take a moment, perhaps maybe close your eyes, and just think back about a wonderful moment that you had with Art. Maybe a moment of joy, maybe a moment of laughter, maybe a moment of holding a hand over something special together. So let's just do that for a minute, get us into the perfect mood for the rest of this afternoon. Okay, I have mine. Unfortunately, I can't tell anybody about it. You know, each of us in this room knew Art, and we all knew him in maybe one or two or three or four facets of his life. But of all the people I've ever run across, Art is the most multifaceted person I've ever known. And so what I've tried to do today is to put together a group of people, each of whom is going to talk about a particular facet of Art's life and how they related to them. And so I'm going to start with our first teller of tales of Art, Madeline Teresa Ciocca McCabe, also known as Lynn. It's Art's little sister. You might think that being Art's little sister would mean that she's known Art longer than anybody else in this room. That's actually not true. With us today is George Dushansky, Art's high school buddy and college roommate, who actually trumps Lynn in knowing Art the longest. Hand up, please, George. But as we all know, those of us who have siblings, sibling relationships are never all peaches and cream. But Art and Lynn had a special bond, and she's here to share her view of Art, her particular facet, Art as a brother. Lynn?
Well, as Bill said, I'm Lynn Ciocca. My formal name, as you heard Bill say, is Madeline, but I'm called Lynn, thanks to Art. Art didn't think a little kid should be named Madeline. He figured that was for old aunts and grandmothers, so it was his idea to nickname me Lynn. And as many of you know, Art could be very persuasive. And then I found it was just a funny coincidence. Out of the 5 guys that worked with Art at the wine group, 2 of them were named Lynn. Go figure. So Art went to college when I was about 2. And it was a big deal when he would come home. I both dreaded and couldn't wait for the tickle fights, which I never won. But his homecomings throughout all of the years were celebrated with my mother cooking for days, the best Italian food you could possibly imagine, and then fabulous family dinners. And both our sister and Carlise reminded me that in our family, Art was referred to as King Arthur. Well, I love to hear Art's travel stories. And when he came home from the Navy, it had such an imprint on me. And again, this is many years ago, that I still remember the name of the ship he was on. For those trivia experts out there, the Suribachi. And he also returned from Africa with great adventures. I don't know whether any of you have read the book. I just reread it on the plane ride over here. And I still have the shield that he brought home. If you want it, you can have it. And he shared with me a few years ago, he actually reconnected with 2 people, a guy and a girl that he hitchhiked with through Africa. And I sat there and I said, what a feisty lady. Imagine, she hitched through Africa with 2 guys who she had just met. And then I realized, of course, one of them was Art, so of course. As a brother, Art was a huge influence on my life and that of our sister Helene. Helene is 2 years younger than Art. And unfortunately, she couldn't be here today because of family medical issues, but she sends her regards to everyone. Art was also a great role model. And I got an MBA and went into marketing and then product management, largely because of the example that Art set. And over the years, I certainly sought his counsel. Since Art was in since Art was in California when I moved to New York City, he wanted to make sure that I had surrogate big brothers. So the first person he introduced me to was Bill Jesse, and it was the beginning of a really great friendship. And of course, George was living in New York City at the time, and as Bill said, he'd gone to Stepanak and Holy Cross with Art, so he'd been in my life for quite a while, but George was sure to keep a watchful eye on me those first few years in New York. Anyway, over the years, Art and I spent a lot of time talking about the various work that I had, and over the last few years, I'd become a leadership coach, and he always encouraged me and sent me a lot of reading. The last book, I actually did read cover to cover, but I have to admit, I didn't always. But Art suggested that I give it to my clients to read, and I did, and he's still making a big difference in my life and in their lives because of it. Strangely enough, Art even influenced my choice of cars. In the 60s, he came home from Europe with a Saab. Years later, my first car was a Saab, and 5 successive Saabs later, I am still driving a Saab that I won't give up, despite the fact that my mechanic warned me about being emotionally attached to my car. But I haven't bothered explaining to him the backstory. And whenever I visited Art, he always wanted me to have a good time. Familiar? In the early years, he took me to concerts. We would hike. I don't play golf, so we hiked in mountains in the desert. But he also liked to make sure that our time together was well spent and had value. So, one of those times in Lake Tahoe, Art, the risk taker, decided to teach me to drive a stick shift. Now, I was a very, very new driver. But Art figured if I could learn to drive a stick in Lake Tahoe, I could drive one anywhere. Well, after the last terrifying stop on a very, very steep hill, we called it quits. Art knew when to cut his losses. I never mastered a stick shift, but at least I didn't manage to kill us that day. Then, as all of you know, Art met, in his words, the love of his life, Carlise. And I got a little sister. Over the next 40 years, it's been my pleasure to spend time with Art and Carlise. And since moving to Boulder, I've had a lot of opportunity to come to the West Coast. If Art and Carlise were in town in San Francisco, I'd get to see them. We'd have great food, often Italian, lots of conversations at dinner, and then the next morning around the breakfast table. Thanks, Robin, for all of those breakfasts. Despite the age difference, Art and I actually grew up in the same home, and it was a few blocks from the Hudson River. Our mother, however, wanted a house that was right on the Hudson. And so as a woman who really knew her mind, those of you who have met her are familiar with that, she found a house on the Hudson. She went and knocked on the door, told the people that if they ever wanted to sell the house, to let her know. Sure enough, years later, the people who owned the house actually came and knocked on the door and said, okay, we're ready to sell, do you want it? So when she shared this with Art decided he would buy the home to expedite the process. But he also knew a good investment when he saw one. I think those of you know that about him. So when it came time for the move, we struck a deal, Art's idea. He'd take it for 16 years. Oh, excuse me. There was a painting in the house that we both loved. So we struck this deal, and he said he'd take it for the first 16 years because that was our age difference, and then I would get it for the next 16 years, and we would keep going back and forth. Sure enough, 16 years later, good to his word, the oil painting showed up in my apartment in New York. Somehow, conveniently, I've managed to forget about the 16-year deal, and I still have the painting. All right. Okay, but I later found out that Art must have really liked the painting, because Carlise and Art ended up buying a painting that was pretty similar. And as I understand, it's still in his office. So thanks, Carlise, for covering for me. Values are probably what Art stood for the most, and he was a keen observer. I think part of what he observed early on was what he saw in our family. Our mother modeled giving back, and as a doctor, our father was always in service to his patients and the community. It was important for them to make a difference. No doubt that informed Art's orientation. But I also must admit, and Bill kind of alluded to this, Art and I didn't always agree. We each tried to convince the other of our point of view, since that rarely worked. Instead, we began to look for common ground. So for instance, we agreed that it's wrong to waste and pollute. But whether we agreed or not, we really had a special bond. And as Carlise so aptly put it, Art and I loved each other, but we also drove each other crazy. So I think it's important to mention that my brother was always there for our sister Helene, her family, and for me. No matter what the issue, Art would listen, consider, and then help to problem solve. I imagine many of you have had him help to problem solve. So in closing, Art was bigger than life for both Helene and for me. Seems like a funny expression, but it's appropriate as he will live in our hearts. Art, thanks for being our big brother.
Bob Smellick was one of the premier investment bankers on the West Coast. And it was Bob that Art called back in 1981 when it was clear that what became the wine group was going up for sale. Bob was instrumental in making sure that Art and his partners were able not only to buy the business, but also to have majority control, a position that enabled so many other things to come true. Bob was on the board of the wine group, and has for many years now taught a case about TWG and art at the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. So Bob's here to share his view, art as an entrepreneur. Bob? By the way, I will be enforcing the 5-minute rule.
I know it.
Lynn being family gets a dispensation, but for everybody else, tough.
Could you put that on the other side? I met Art, I think before many of you did. It sounds like Bill and George might have been before I had met him. But I met him in the early 70s through a mutual friend of ours, Gil Collins, who was a ski buddy of Art's when Art was at Holy Cross and Gil was at Brown. I discovered soon after meeting the two of them that their idea of skiing was to find the top of a mountain and race to the bottom, and to repeat this until the mountain was closed. Weekend dinners with our group of friends seemed always to involve updates on new speed records set by Art's Porsche at the time, and bicycle, and furthermore, updates on his downhill racing scores. These dinners were also filled with laughter and curiosity about each other's careers. It was just a great pleasure, and FYI, they were all organized and driven by Art. During one of the dinners, Art gave us a flyover of his new job as president of a wine company owned by Coca-Cola Bottling in New York. And a challenging project it was, but a great opportunity from Art's point of view. He was excited, and he wanted to know what we all thought. Little things that reflect Art's personality. During this time together, we shared a lot of dinners, and then Art invited us all to an Easter morning breakfast at his house that he had organized, and this must have been in the mid-'70s. My mom was in town from Arizona, and he asked for sure that we include her. At the breakfast, Art spent half an hour making her feel like she was the featured guest of that event. Fast forward, on Friday evening in early 1980, I was minding my own business on an evening that was going to be early for me, and I received a call from Art. He had just gotten off a plane from New York and said, "Bob, can I come over to your place tomorrow morning? I need to talk to you, maybe around 7 a.m. Sure, I responded, wondering why the urgency of 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The next morning at 6:45, there's a knock on the door. Art's first words were, as Bill suggests, "Bob, what's a leverage buyout?" He had flown back to a board meeting at Coca-Cola Bottling the previous week, and during the board meeting, there was a discussion of the wine group and the wine industry as a business. Some board member had volunteered that, was this really a good business? And in fact, in his judgment, it was a lousy business. Art didn't like that. He and his team had been working to really turn the company in a very positive direction. And so as Art explained to me, and I just blurted out, "Look, if you don't like the business, I'll buy it." Now, he volunteered that he didn't have the proceeds in his bank account at the time, but we talked about what his plans might be if he did buy it, buybacks in general, and shared the numbers with me. The numbers were a little ragged, and clearly they had additional progress to make. But I told them that I would get in contact with people in New York at First Boston that knew a lot more about leveraged buyouts than I did and had more experience in the area. So I set up a meeting with two partners in the firm, with some resistance on their part, given that it was quite a small transaction, and given that the financials really hadn't achieved the level of success that Art was aiming for. The day of Art's meeting in New York, that same day, I received a call from my New York colleagues, late in the day, obviously later in their day, and it went something like, "Bob, we met with Art. He's a very impressive person. We really liked him. Very believable, the kind that won't blow smoke at you. And we've called the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company and told them that they just had to invest in this deal. And we want to help Art get this done." And they did get it done with Bill's help. And Bill suggested that I was the one that sort of paved the way for this 50.1% management control. You know, when everybody else is putting up the money and the management team was putting up $800,000 after total financing of, I think, $32 million. And they had control, highly unusual. And as Bill mentioned, I do still teach the course at Virginia, and it's on the wine group. And one of the members of First Boston in an interview said, "I can't believe we gave the management team 50.1%. But guess what? It turned out well, and it turned out well because Art was Art. And the negotiations, when it came time for First Boston to leave and the Metropolitan Life to lead, it wasn't the smoothest in the world, but we got there because Art was a very, very reasonable person, and it gave management the opportunity to build with 100% ownership after they bought us out, the wine group. And clearly the wine group story, going from 26th in the industry to second in the industry, is a story of excellence that is rarely seen. So I had known Art for about 10 years at that time and had begun to see, and my topic is Art as an entrepreneur, the profile of Art Ciocca as a leader and as an entrepreneur. Competitive, energy, ambitious, motivated, trustworthy, considerate, a builder, a visionary. Later in that same year, I got another call from Art early on Friday to see if Gail and I could meet him for a drink at the Chow restaurant in San Francisco, led by Larry Mandel. We arrived, and Art introduced us to Carlise Franzia. Now, I knew Art pretty well. He was confident, he was calm, he was steady at the helm, but he was melting before our very eyes. It was clear to us that he had found his life's partner. For the last 20 years, I have taught this course at Virginia, and the name of the course is entitled Leadership and Cultures of Innovation. It seems like of the 10 people that the course is about, 5 of them are great friends. We're great friends of Art's, Larry Mandel being one of them, Gary Rogers being another one, Bob Swanson, founder of Genentech, being another. Part of the Young Presidents Organization group that Bill was also a member of. The wine group is one of the most favorite cases, and it's based on about 20 hours of filmed interviews that I did with people from the wine company, Carlise, Art, etc. Art joined the course virtually every year until his health became an issue 3 years ago. The wine group still remains one of the course's most referenced in papers that I have to grade for the entire course. One of the interviews for the case was with John DeLuca, who at the time was president of the Wine Institute. In the interview, he commented, "Before we talk about Art as an entrepreneur, a leader, I think you have to start with the fact that Art is a genuinely nice person. He is a wonderful person to spend time with. He is interested in what you have to say. He is a great listener. He is humble. He's a natural leader. People feel comfortable following him." And this is a not uncommon pattern that I've seen in great leaders, and Art being one of them. One of the student papers in a recent class includes a reference to Art. Art seemed to treat business like a chess match. Moving from 26 to 22 in the industry could only have been done with intense innovation, seeing around corners, and building a culture of an agile organization. He made the distinction between builder and harvester. Characterizations go technicolor for me. That was a student's impression. Another perspective on Art as an entrepreneur can be seen in a sheet of paper that Art delivered to the students in a class about 4 years ago. And it was the last class that he attended virtually. And it's entitled Advice to Graduating MBAs. By the way, Carlise shared this with a class just last month. One of them, think like an owner during your business career. Embrace change as your friend. Don't be afraid to take risks. Don't punish failure, but have a back door. Hire smart and hire for values and culture fit over talent. Politics cripples organizations. When politics is up, performance is down. Understand the enormous power of cultural values. Understand the value of simplicity. Don't believe your own PR. Be proud, but not arrogant. And most importantly, and Art said this in an interview out in the grapeland, but he turned around and said, one of the things I'm most proud of is that we have improved the business that we accepted. And he put it in this sentence, you accept the chalice, polish it, and pass it on better than when you had received it. When you add all this together and the success of first Art as an entrepreneur, taking a struggling company to the second in its industry, creating billions of dollars in the process, you put that together with his creation for the wine group in partnership with Bill of a highly creative, unique succession plan through incenting people to find wine group leadership that was better than theirs and retiring at that point rather than extending their tenure with the wine group. You add that together with Art's and Carlise's impact through scholarship for deserving students in the lives of thousands of students in California, and you add that together with Art's founding, along with Carlise, of principled entrepreneurship programs across the country. You add all these things together, and it drew me back as I reflected on it, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's reference to the following: act in the living presence and depart, leaving behind footprints on the sands of time. And clearly those footprints of Art Ciocca will be present on the sands of time. A well-lived life. You will be very missed, Art. Bob and Gail.
I'm not going to deliberately sort of date anybody in the room here, but a few of you may remember something called the Yellow Pages. They were called that because they were, in fact, yellow. Ross Brown had the unenviable job of presiding over the Pacific Telephone. Anybody remember that company? Yellow Pages at the onset of the internet era. He somehow survived that and then transitioned to his second career as a very successful executive search consultant. And along the way, he picked up a pretty good golf game and connected with Art, who was known to enjoy, well, maybe a little more than enjoy, a fine round of golf. So Ross is going to share with us his view of Art as a golfer. Ross?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am here to help everyone celebrate the magnificent life of Art. When I first met Art, I didn't need these, but now I do. My wife told me I should wear them, so there we go. With the possible exception of Carlise and seeing a new wine brand sell 3 million cases, few things stimulated Art's passion more than the game of golf. It was through golf that Art and I developed a beautiful, deep, and unforgettable friendship. Art was one of the most extraordinary individuals I have ever met. He was the type of person that if you were extremely fortunate, you get to meet once in a lifetime. Art was an author, an innovator, an educator, an entrepreneur non-pariah, an inventor, a cyclist, a philanthropist, a sportsman, a diplomat, a marketing genius, a manager, a wine man, a loyal friend, and of course, a golfer. Most values that people give mere lip service to, Art had hardwired into his every pore. He was determined, focused, discreet, principled, non-judgmental, gracious, perspicacious, humble, and irrepressible. Over the years, I came to truly love this man, and I would cherish the time we had together, most of which was either on the golf course, in the wine group boardroom, or at his famous breakfast table. I will focus my remembrances of Art to golf, where his essence came shining through in a magnificent quarter century where I had the honor and joy of his company. I'd like to share just a few highlights, a few brushstrokes which will help complement the portrait of my dear, dear friend Arthur Ciocca. Every weekend, Art and I had a standing game here, right here at the Olympic Club, where no more than $20 could possibly change hands. To Art and me, it was an extremely, extremely important $20. Neither one of us was above pure gamesmanship to vanquish the other. Extreme competitiveness was something Art and I had in common. One day, after the mandatory argument on strokes to be given, off we went. In those days, the mid-90s, politics were less of a blood sport than they are today. What Art and I did not have in common were our political views. Art was a reasonable Republican, heading right, and I was a moderate Democrat, heading in the other direction. The two of us would needle each other ruthlessly with endless levels of political trash talk until one of us, usually me, would acquiesce under the sheer weight of the other's cynicism. On this particular day, Art was on his game. He had a 3-up lead after 5 holes. This was late summer of 1996, and the presidential campaign was in full swing. As Art approached the tee right down here on the 6th hole, I decided to strike. You know, Art, your pals Dole and Kemp don't have a chance to beat Clinton in November. I'm sure I saw Art's cheeks puff red and his teeth begin to grind. He proceeded to hit a ball that to this day has never been found. And he was putty in my hands after that. I actually felt bad, but not so bad that I would not share this story at this time of celebration and memories. I also took his $20. After 25 years, Art and I just about broke even because he did extremely well in the Bush era. Art and I were members of the notorious San Francisco Shankers Golfing Society. A few pictures you've seen of us. A group of aging YPOers led by the late Peter Gardner. One evening in late June, we were returning to Turnberry, Scotland after a barbecue at Laird Jimmy Wilson's castle in Northern Ayrshire, along the River Clyde in Scotland. Beautiful, beautiful spot. The sun was still high in the sky at 7:30 p.m., so I jokingly shouted out to the back of our tour bus, "Who's ready for another 18?" I was roundly shouted down by the inebriated group, save one, Art Ciocca. That would be very nice. So at 7:45, with our golf bags on our backs, we strode out on a deserted Turnberry golf course. Thoroughly in our cups, I don't think either one of us broke 100. But I absolutely remember Art winning his $20, which he insisted payment in pounds sterling. We have often reminisced about that joyful evening. Somewhere in someone's archives, there's a picture of Art and I trudging up the 130 steps to the hotel with the sun just setting and the clock in the background reading 11 p.m., the Turnberry bagpiper having long since gone to bed. I could go on and on, a passion shared, games played with his professional golfing cousins, the Turnesses. Art had more cousins than anyone I knew. I'm surprised this room could fit them all. Sleepy Hollow on the Hudson in New York, the Meadow Club in Marin, our trip to the Masters with David Anaker in 2000, Riviera, the LA Country Club, Royal St. George's in Sandwich, England, Castle Pines in Colorado, and the desert, of course. He loved his golf. Art was always curious by nature and would ask a lot of questions. In Scotland, he and I had a best ball match against 2 extremely short Scottish brothers, one of whom was an OBGYN by the name of Bobby Lowe. After the match over drinks, the curious Mr. Ciocca asked Bobby why he had become a gynecologist, to which Bobby responded over his glass of Glenfiddich, "Because I wasn't tall enough to be a brain surgeon." How Art loved that story. He loved to tell that story. I will miss you, my dear friend. Thank you for your friendship and for the thousands of memories. You have led an extremely distinguished life, with honor and class. If your golf game was as good as your character, you would be scratch. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Art was a golfer. I was always more of a flogger, which is golf spelled backwards. But I have a treasured moment about Art golfing that I just thought about with Ross talking. We were playing at Silverado, and Art hit this beautiful drive on, I don't know what number hole it was, which has a road running on the right-hand side and went off and then just started to drift a little bit to the right, bounced on a road, and then landed on a Cadillac driving down the road. And, many golfers would have gone, "Phew, phew, phew, that must have been somebody else's ball." But Art did the exact opposite. He drove up in the golf cart full speed, jumped out of the cart, went up to the fence and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And this very perfectly coiffed woman steps out of the car, looks at her windshield, says, "No, everything's fine. Don't worry about it." Art goes, "Oh, thank God." And then she looked at him and goes, "But Sonny, you ought to do something about that slice." You remember that, Carlos? So that's one of my precious golf memories with Art. So let me introduce Ken Elizer. So Ken's been in the wine business for over 20 years. When a bit of a whim one day, he decided to take up an offer to talk to Art about a position at the wine group. Well, that turned into a multi-year career at TWG, initially as head of sales, later as a board member. And I will tell you that Ken was in the middle of some events at the wine group as it managed quite successfully through a few of its most difficult challenges, and I'm not sure that we would have got through them without Ken. So Ken is going to share with us today his view, Art as a boss. Ken?
Hi, thanks. So Ken, what do you know about a performance culture? That's how the interview started. I walked in his office, that's the first thing he said, "Sit down, what do you think about a performance culture?" I said, "Well, yeah, I have a resume." He said, yeah, we'll get to that, put this down. And he reached in his desk and he pulled out a piece of paper, literally this piece of paper. And on it is it's very hard to read because this is quite literally, Church told me a lot about the wine group at the time. It is a Xerox of a fax of a mimeograph. 3 people in the table right here now think I'm just making up words. And he said, these are the ingredients of a performance culture. They are the wine group core values. And that's what we're going to talk about. 2 hours later, I had found my new home. But instead of me talking about the 10 core values, I thought what I'd do is I would call people, past and present, that work at the wine group, and see how the core values are going now, 40 years after he wrote them down. When I talk to the old-timers, they immediately want to talk about core value number 3. Art called it cost mindfulness. If anyone's worked at the wine group for 6 days, knows that we can hang on to a nickel with the best of them. Dale Jackson, one of our customer service guys in the past, told me one day, he said, other than 3M, the wine group's the only company that has duct tape as a line item on every year's budget. My good friend John Quinlivan loves to tell the story of his first national sales meeting in 1983. He came from Carnation. He shows up. There's 8 other people in the room. He looks around. He thinks he's in a breakout session. Right? He's assured that this is the entire national sales organization. Art takes him on a tour of the Ripon Winery and for a couple hours shows them very pridefully all of the cost-cutting measures that he had implemented that year, including a liberal use of 3M's favorite product. At the end of the day, John turns to his boss and he says, if it's all the same to you, can I get paid in cash every Friday? The rest of the core values, though, speak to character. And when I talk to people who are new at the wine group, people who didn't know Art personally, then I found out what the legacy of the man really is. I talked to Cassie Goki and Brandon Eason last week. Cassie last week won the top sales award at the national meeting, and Brandon Eason had won the same award a year before. And I asked them to just tell me about their success. And they didn't talk about them. They wouldn't talk about them. They talked about the team and the help. And Cassie, who literally runs 10 divisions of Kroger all by herself, says, I really feel that every single person at the wine group has my back every day. I talked to Bridget Daly, who's been in marketing for about 5 years, and her comments on the wine group being non-political are the same comments that I heard from Pat Terrell, who retired a few years ago after 28 successful years. And we're not talking about red versus blue toxicity politics. We're talking about the company politics that can really infect and hurt a growing company. Bridget told me that at the wine group, taking credit and fixing blame are the mortal enemies of growth and innovation, right? I talked to Colin Cooney, who for the last 6 years has been the lead marketer on the Franzia brand. And Colin talked to me about the pride of working for the wine group, but that pride can never turn into arrogance. And it reminded me of the same thing that Dan Murray said to me 20 years ago, the first day we were working. I told Dan, I said, this is a very quiet company. And he said, Ken, at the wine group, well done is always better than well said. But it was a conversation I had with a young man named Kawan Hunter that really brought it home for me. Kawan started with the company in 2021. He never met Art, but you would not know it if you talked to him, because I could hear the same words. He said these faded words on this page, they're not words, they're a promise. It's a promise that was made to him by his boss, Kristen Flores. When she brought him into the company, she said, you will be accepted, you will be respected, and I will do everything I can to make you successful. That's the legacy of Art Ciocca at the wine group. A promise made is a promise kept. It doesn't matter if you're like Kate Hardy, our new CEO, and Amy Hoops, our new head of strategy, who, like me, spent 20 years somewhere else before finding their home at the wine group. Or you could be like Matt Henderson and Armando Batista, who found the wine group early in their career and never saw reason to leave. Congratulations, by the way, Armando, who celebrated 30 years last week. A promise made is a promise kept. So, on behalf of all wine group people, past and present, Carlise, thank you for sharing that remarkable man with us for 40 years. And if I can, personally, publicly, one more time, thank you, Art Ciocca, you changed my life.
Thank you, Ken. Casey and Zach Georgeson are our only tag team match today. Casey reminded me that she first met Art, and me actually, the same day when she was 4 years old and was the flower girl at Art and Carlisa's wedding. But if I can digress for just a moment, come on up, Zach. That was a really magical day at a modest but very special St. Patrick's Church in Ribbon, California. What's also special a little bit today is that most of the wedding party is with us. So maid of honor Leslie Fisher, bridesmaids Lynn Ciocca and Denise Leach. I think Ophelia's probably here in spirit. On Art's side, best man Joe Gallo, groomsman Jim Fisher, and Bob Smellick and myself. It brings back a whole bunch of fond memories and a bunch of things about the early days of Art and Carlise, which I'll get together about later, Carlise. Oh, it'll be fun, trust me. Casey and Zach are both entrepreneurs. Casey founded St. Jane, a luxury skincare company. Zach founded Mile Rock Capital, a value-oriented real estate private equity firm. And here's Casey and Zach sharing their view of Art, both as an uncle and as a mentor.
So many of you know Art as an entrepreneur, a CEO, an avid skier, preferably helicopter skiing, a mentor, an investor, an industry visionary, a philanthropist. He is all of those things. I know him as Uncle Art. I first met Uncle Art when I was 4 years old and a flower girl in his wedding to Carlise, which is a great love story. I didn't know at the time that he would become one of the most pivotal influences in my life. Over the last 40 years, we covered a lot of ground. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every birthday. Each card I wrote him, he was really big on cards, each card I wrote him always ended with, "I'm so lucky to have you in my life." He loved to make the holidays unforgettable with his creativity around gifting to Carlise. One Christmas Eve, I was about 13, he wanted to surprise her with a new pair of earrings. He pulled me aside to wear them, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, just waiting for her to notice. As you know, he and Carlise never had children, so my brother, sister, and I got to tag along on a lot of family trips over the years. His sense of adventure was contagious. One drive home from a YPO trip in Tahoe, we were spotting license plates on the highway. He was so into the competition, he didn't notice the highway patrol officer lurking nearby, ready with his speeding ticket. He wasn't happy, but in typical Art fashion, it didn't stop him from getting right back into the game, and I think he won that one. It's not an overstatement to say that my life would be very different if I didn't have the incredible good fortune of not only knowing Art, but also having his unwavering support. He's always been my biggest cheerleader in life and career. He often saw more in me than I saw in myself and seemed to know exactly what I needed before I did. I will always treasure our family dinners. Starting when I was a teenager, I'd drive into San Francisco to meet Carlise and Art, usually at Jackson Fillmore. Uncle Art would pepper me with questions about school and college applications, hoping his alma mater, Holy Cross, would be in the running. I wasn't sure about it at first, but he was so confident it would be a great fit for me. As with many, many, many other life decisions, he was right. We graduated exactly 40 years apart. When he first received his cancer diagnosis in 2004, I quit my job in New York and came home to be closer to him. It was the best decision I could have made because he asked me to help him write his first 2 books. Over the course of that year, I got to know so many more amazing dimensions of Art. From his childhood in Tarrytown to his time in the Navy, what motivated him in business, and his deeply, deeply inspiring values. I will always be humbled by his values. He was a truly good person. He cared with his whole heart. He was authentic, and he supported those he loved with steadfast confidence. What many of you may not know is he also had an extremely silly side. He was the first one to meet our oldest daughter, Sophia, just hours after she was born. Zach and I had only slept 90 minutes when he literally waltzed into our hospital room to meet his new niece. He was so excited. His enthusiasm filled up the whole maternity ward, completely erasing our fatigue. Over the years, he loved to pop by to see us, whether he was on one of his bike rides or at a nearby dinner with Carlise. He liked to surprise our 3 girls with full cowboy attire on a random Friday night. He let them dress him in costumes, full-face stickers, princess crowns, flower crowns. He loved to joke with them about styling his hair. They stuffed him in tunnels and playhouses. He did anything he thought would make them smile. Being seen through his eyes is a gift I will treasure for the rest of my life. My last conversation with him was the week before he passed away. He called to see how the girls were doing. He always started with, "Hey, Casey, how are the girls?" His voice was weaker than I'd heard before, so I spent a little extra time at the end telling him how much I loved him. I'll always miss you, Uncle Art, and feel grateful for the mentorship, influence, and love you so generously shared with all of us.
Not long ago, I sat down to talk to Art about what motivated him most in life. He said the success of other people around him and watching them grow and flourish is what motivated him more than making money ever did. As my mentor, Art helped me grow and flourish beyond what I ever thought possible. Perhaps the greatest gift Art gave me as a mentor was the confidence to become an entrepreneur. This was particularly beneficial as I started my business during the great financial crisis of 2008. I'll never forget calling Art about starting my business to see if he and Carlise could get together for one of our usual breakfasts. He would always pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Zach, how are you?" And would always agree to get together without ever knowing the reason. In this instance, I was telling him that I was going to be starting a real estate company. Keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, this was in late 2008, right after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The market and sentiment could not have been bleaker. Could not have been bleaker. Without wavering, before I could even finish telling him my idea, he slammed his hand on the famous kitchen table that Ross just mentioned and said, "You should absolutely do this." His confidence in me was the turning point, so much so that we named our company Mile Rock Capital, after the century-old Mile Rock Lighthouse that can be seen from Art and Carlise's house in Seacliff. From that point forward, he was always supportive and encouraging. Now, there were certainly scary times indeed, to be sure, particularly when I questioned my decision to leave my safe and secure job with a brand new baby, but Art would always say, "Keep the long term in mind." And it was without a doubt the right thing to do. He always believed in me, and he never wavered. I do think he also got a kick out of reliving his entrepreneurial days through me. I used to love getting calls from him, day and night, challenging our investment strategies to make sure we were thinking everything through. How are you thinking about supply and demand in the real estate industry? What happens if interest rates go up? Were some of his common questions. During this time, my favorite thing to do with Art was our weekend hikes in Marin. We'd stop at a grocery store and get what he would call the Italian picnic to bring on our hike. But really, this was just a very large feast of prosciutto, salami, cheese, and bread that we would bring with us. We'd hike for hours, and he would patiently let me pester him with questions and vent about the trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur. I always looked forward to those hikes and will treasure the memories for as long as I live. Art's impact on me has been immeasurable, and I am so grateful for his 2 decades-long mentorship. Art, thank you for your steady guidance, unwavering support, and endless encouragement. I will miss you.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Zach. Kevin Gentry is the Vice President of Stand Together. Stand Together was founded in 2003 by Art's dear friend Charles Koch, who's with us today. Charles, thank you for coming. Art was one of the first members of what is now 700 business people and philanthropists that are part of Stand Together. Stand Together tackles some of society's most embedded problems through thousands of partners working in a bottom-up manner. So here's Kevin's view, Art as a philanthropist. Kevin?
So for many of us who are even here, who are privileged to work with Art in philanthropy, we had an amazing partner. He challenged us, he encouraged us, and he inspired us. You know, he was an outside-the-box thinker, pardon the pun. But he had a great gift in 2 ways, and the combination of that was really powerful. First of all, you know, he had the courage and the vision to challenge existing paradigms. He loved to disrupt the status quo, and that mindset was itself so powerful, as so many others have said. But even as Zach just said, he had that also, those values, that deep belief in people, that anyone, any of us, could exceed our greatest potential if given the opportunity. And when you combine that mindset with those values in philanthropy, the sky's the limit. So we got to work with him in 3 big initiatives with Art and Carlise. One was in higher education in principled entrepreneurship, which Bob has referenced, and you've heard about that. There are many folks here. He and Carlise started the Center in Principled Entrepreneurship at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., at Holy Cross, his alma mater, also at University of Santa Clara, Carlise's alma mater. And the product of that is that today, every day, hundreds of students are being taught in a very different mindset about business. Instead of the sort of winner-take-all environment that's prevalent in many business schools, instead the focus is on creating real long-term value for society that benefits all constituencies in a real win-win way. And that's pretty cool, and that has a lasting influence. Art brought to us the idea of OpenStax, which is an online textbook disruption. Estimates are now in the last 5 years, that disruption to the textbook marketplace has saved American families $1.2 billion. And that's the kind of thinking, the disruptive thinking that he would bring. And then in education today, especially in K-12, he worked with us on a number of initiatives that are driving innovation and experimentation to bring in new approaches to education beyond the traditional models. Those disruptions, just in the past years in COVID, have gotten to the point that now 10% of American families have at least one child being taught outside the old traditional way. And that has powerful, disruptive, positive effects as well for years to come. So it's that combination of the values and the disruption that not only created impact in the moment, but it has societal impact. And that was the vision and courage and disruptive and innovative thinking of Art. But the additional value for so many of us that got to work with him were just those conversations, the emails, the calls, everyone has referenced. They always made us each a better person. And I think I could speak for many people here in this room. You know the kind of things that would be more, better, faster. How do we make this more efficient? How do we make this more effective? He said, I think we're really making a difference right now. It seems like we're in a tipping point. It sounds like now is the time to triple down. Can we do more? What about right now? It seems like this is the point. Let's go. And I know many times I would hang up the phone, and I told him this many times. I always left a call a better person. He wanted to make the world a better place. We have a lot of problems in our world, but I think we can conclude that thanks to Art, we're on the track to becoming a much better place. Thank you, Art Ciocca.
Thanks, Kevin. One of the most important people in Art's life was Dino Cortopassi. Art served for 32 years on the Stanislaus Food Products Advisory Board with Dino and a few other pretty fun and interesting people. Dino was originally going to be chatting today. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us, but he's well represented by his family, including Joan. Where are you, Joan? His wife is 63 years. And Dino's nephew, Tom Cortopassi. Tom started working at SFP during his summers at Santa Clara University and then joined the company a few years later after his graduation. In 2002, Tom succeeded Dino as a CEO and had the benefit of Art's wisdom through 2019, which was the end of the original Stanislaus Advisory Board. So here's Tom's view, Art as an advisor. Tom?
My uncle, Dino, and Art, they developed their friendship when they were in YPO. But that friendship truly blossomed the years after YPO. A few decades ago, Dino decided to form an advisory board for Stanislaus Food Products. That was his small but growing tomato canning business located in Modesto. Dino instinctively knew that he had to have his friend and respected business peer Art on the board. Thankfully for us, Art accepted the invitation, provided us with a ton of great advice over the years, and Art never missed a meeting in 32 years. I first met Art in 1999 when I attended my first advisory board meeting. From day one, it became abundantly clear to me that Art had an exceptional business mind, clearly understood our company, and he was an excellent communicator. A few years later, I became president of the company. And I felt a great privilege because Art was now providing me with both business advice and a few tips on how to succeed a hard-charging, legendary figure like my uncle. Art was obviously smart and a very experienced business person, but he had this it factor when it came to giving advice. The it factor was he truly loved business. He just loved business. I can still close my eyes and still vividly remember how Art would get really excited about an opportunity or an idea. In fact, you could see it in Art's eyes. He just had this gleam in his eyes. And then he would, like somebody else said, he would pound down the table and he'd say, "This is big. This is a big idea. I mean really big." He also liked to, I didn't know he liked to say triple down. That must have been a little later. Because he would look at me and say, "Tom, with your advantage in the marketplace, you need to double down on this." He liked to double. I don't know, did he play, was he a blackjack player? Because when he sensed an opportunity, it was time to double down. We would meet once a quarter, but Art's level of commitment to our business was much deeper than this. I would usually receive a minimum of one email every month from Art. And the email, had an article attached to it. The article always had a connection to our business. But he didn't just attach the article. He would give me a little message. He would explain why he felt the article was pertinent to our business and why we need to get ahead of this issue. Yes, he actually used the word our and we all the time when he talked to me. See, the bottom line is you cannot find a better advisor than someone that fully embraces your business as if it was his business. Last night, in preparation for this, I wanted to find that last email I got from Art. He sent it to Dino and I both. It arrived 3 months ago. It was early November and contained an article about one of our customers. As usual, the article was relevant to our business and Art's commentary was spot on. I think the best way for me to finish up my little talk here and to honor Art at the same time is to actually just read to you Dino's reply. This is what Dino wrote. "Art, you are amazing. You're an inspiration and my hero." Thank you.
Okay, we're about halfway there, so it'll be a brief intermission. No, we're going to wrap up now. I started this with saying that Art is my best friend, and he is my best friend. And My view is art as a friend. We were a lot of things together. We were business partners. We were playmates. We actually dated for a while. I'll tell you about that later. But this is really about art as my friend. I feel like I've known him forever, but really going back and looking at things, I realized that I only met Art in 4 BC. BC, of course, is before Carlise. Art and I were both division presidents at the Coca-Cola Bottling Company of New York. The occasion was the 1978 planning meeting of Coke New York in January of 1978 in Hobe Sound, Florida, at the Jupiter Island Club. That tells you all you need to know about Coke New York. Why do you have your 1978 planning meeting in January of 78 instead of September of 77 in Hackensack, New Jersey? Art and I were the youngest people there, but more importantly, we were also the only single people there, and that is when we started dating. Sitting next to each other, first night was interesting. Second night was you again. Third night was my turnaround is harder than your turnaround. And that discussion eventually blossomed into a lifelong, multi-dimensional friendship. I still actually believe mine was harder than his, but that is what it is. We got super close during the acquisition of the wine group from Coke New York, and it would be derelict not to call out his partners in 1981 who helped make everything happen. Lynn Bates, Lynn McShane, that's Lynn's two Lynn's, Lynn's two Lynn's, Lynn's two. Try and say that 3 times fast. Luke Quasha, Morris Ball, and Steve Hughes, each of whom were key in navigating the early years of TWG. I originally thought that it would be useful in the concept of doing all facets of art to spend a little time on art in the BC years. But actually, on reflection, I thought that might not be such a good idea, so I decided I am not going to talk about art on a rope swing after dinner into Lake Tahoe in February. But Art transitioned out of the BC years, and I'll never forget a call from him announcing, "Bill, I'm coming to dinner at your house tomorrow." That was literally it. It was an announcement. It wasn't like, "Could you have me for dinner?" or anything. And I'm bringing a friend. Of course, you can all probably guess who the friend was. I was living in a small flat on Russian Hill at the time with a very nice terrace with a great view of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so I ran out, I picked up some fresh crab, a baguette, got a box of Francia Chardonnay. Actually, this predates the box, so it couldn't have been that. And I remember sitting there, and Art shows up with Carlise, and she's a nice-looking girl, I said, "Okay, this will be pretty good." Sits down. Carlise picks up like a half body of crab and just rips the legs off. And I go, "Okay, this is somebody who can stand up to Art." And she has ever since, for 40 years. And you still will, because he will always, always be with you. When I say Art's my best friend, I do mean it, but it's not in the poker night sense, although we did do that. It's not in having a good bottle of wine together, although we did that. It's not because of the stimulating conversations you could have with Art, although we had plenty of those. But for me, it was because Art always met the definition of a true best friend. And your best friend is someone who tells you what you need to hear when you need to hear it. And that is exactly what Art always was for me. He never quit being a friend. So after our visit last November, a couple weeks later, Art called me. He said, "Bill, I got something that's really weighing on me. I need to get it off my chest." So, of course, I'm getting ready. Is this going to be about education? Are the Russians invading Ukraine? Who knows? I said, "Sure, Art, what is it?" He said, "Bill, you got to lose some weight." And that was Art, my best friend, telling me what I needed to hear, when I needed to hear it, direct and unvarnished. Thanks to all of you for coming today. especially those of you who had to travel to get here. Thanks to Lynn, Bob, Ross, Ken, Casey, Zach, Kevin, and Tom for sharing with us. But I also need to thank my wife, Jessica, for helping me through all of this. And for those of you who have the program, if you look at that fine picture on the front of the program, that was taken at Jessica and my wedding. And that's Art at our wedding dinner that night. So thank you, Art. Thank you, Carlise, for the deep honor and privilege of organizing some of these conversations today about the memories of my dear friend, the remarkable, and always with me, Art Ciocca. Thank you, everybody.